Hello and welcome to Boothcast. On Boothcast, I speak to people who inspire me about sport, business, and the winning mindset. Today's guest is James Casey. He is a five-time Australian champion in stand-up paddleboarding. He's won Molokai to Oahu, King of the Cut over here in WA. He's probably moved into the forefront of foiling. Definitely, probably the number one guy in foiling in Australia at the moment. Right into coaching, education, and still coaching in the stand-up paddleboarding scene as well. So we're probably going to cap off on all of that through the chat. But James, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Boothie. It's been we've been talking about this probably for 2 years.
I know. Yeah. It was quite funny because the initial time that I messaged you, I was like hammering him out, and I messaged like heaps of people, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm probably a bit worn out now. So I kind of just stopped doing them for probably almost like a year, and now I'm just sort of drip feeding them back, reconnecting with the people who sort of said yes originally. So that's quite good to be doing this. And I guess the last time we properly had a chat was September on the Casey catch up.
Yeah, exactly. So it's good to catch up with you again because you've been over in Carolina and I've had a few things going on too. So yeah, timing's good.
Yeah. So well, let's start with dad life. How's it going? You've got a young fella now. How's that all going for you and Lana?
Yeah, loving it. You've gone through something similar. About 2 months apart. My little man's 2 months. Yours must be 4 months. And it's amazing how it changes your priorities on everything. Like, I don't want to be surfing for 3 or 4 hours or paddling for 3 or 4 hours. I want to, go through, get my fix, like 30, 45 minutes, come back and, just see the little smile. And yeah, it's cool. Like I didn't think I would. I've always been afraid of kids, like little newborns. I never wanted to hold them because I thought, I don't want to break them. But when it's your own, it's just like, I don't know. I'm smitten by them for sure.
It definitely changes the perspective. I know that even because now I'm really excited to get back to racing and traveling again. And now I'm like, okay, I'll do 2 to 3 weeks at a time. I'll cop the extra flight so I can get home and see the young fella. And I was, I guess, similar to you, super scared of kids before I had kids. I didn't want to touch them, didn't want to hold people. Like, do you want to hold our child? I'm like, why?
Yeah, I was the same. I'm like, oh, I don't want to break it. Like I remember when Kenny had his kid and he's like, oh, do you want to hold Sono? And I was hold Minami. And I was like, I'm happy just looking.
Yeah, it's crazy. What was your young man's name?
Kobe, young Kobe.
I was going to say Kai, and I was like, that's not right. So I have
not Kai.
Have a stab at it. So, well, let's actually go into early days. So that's normally on this thing we sort of go through why we sort of got involved in sport and how we sort of found our feet, especially with yourself, sort of entrepreneurial in sort of the SUP and foiling space. So I guess first off, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the northern beaches of Sydney. So grew up, first house was in Narrabeen area. Basically, mum and dad were both surfers. So it was I was always going to be getting in the water. And we actually moved over to Perth 18 months when I went to Cottesloe Primary for, I guess a year and a half. And I guess, a beautiful place and for dad's work opportunity and just a short stint came back. Basically been on northern beaches ever since. And grew up surfing and, like most kids, I was doing all the different sports. I did nippers, I did basketball, did a bit of cricket, rugby, Aussie rules, and did soccer too. So I was into a lot of different things, and then probably swimming too. I was in squads, but just an active kid and went to the local school, Pittwater House down the road, and it was just good. Very fortunate to live in a nice coastal part of Sydney, and definitely stoked the fire for competitive stuff because some kids seem to have it and a competitive fire, and I certainly did. And the hardest thing for me, even up until my sort of early 20s, was picking the one sport that I wanted to do, put all my eggs into the basket. Because I was still playing rugby and I was still surfing and I was, and then I guess probably get into the stand-up stuff, and it was I was playing in the Shoot Shield for the club, my local club, the Warringah Rats, and I've still got some good mates who probably don't play anymore, but mates from that sort of growing up, teenager to sort of early 20s, playing for the Warringah Rats. And the first grade, I was sort of in and out of first grade and second grade mainly. And the first grade coach sort of pulled me aside one day and he said, look, you're playing well, but you just got to put on a bit more weight and you just got to decide whether you want to surf or do your ocean thing, or if you want to play rugby. And if you want to play rugby, you've got to spend time in the gym. You've got to spend less time in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, it's okay. I want to play rugby, because obviously you tell your coach what you. But at the time, I did want to play, and I was really into it. And then I remember that was a real pivotal point, because I put like the next 6 months gym, put on a bit of weight, like eating more, and just got bulked up. And the end of the season, I was looking at this event called the Merimbula Classic, which is now, most people in the SUP world in Australia know what the Merimbula Classic is. And I was like, to Deline, like, oh, I'd like to go down to this event called the Merimbula Classic. It's got kiteboarding, stand up. It looks like a cool sort of event. We went down to that, and I met JC Shimahara and Toby Cracknell, two guys who at the time were both into SUP racing and SUP surfing. And just coming off like a full season rugby, getting like big and strong. Like I was look at photos back then, I'm like, man, I was thick.
Yeah.
Didn't have a neck, and I went down and I competed in that event. It was just like a free surf sort of event, and was hanging out with JC and Toby a lot, because we were sort of similar age and sort of surfing in the same spots. And JC goes to Toby and myself, he goes, you guys should come to the Sunset event. It's like an epic, it's a SUP surf event, and basically get to surf Sunset with 3 other guys out. Like, you'd be crazy not to. He's like, you can stay at my house, and it'll be fun. And so I chatted to my now wife, Lana. I'm like, what do you reckon? Should I go? She goes, why not? So I did that, and pretty much that was the last of rugby. Basically, it was like the end of it. And I guess prior to that, I was actually going to Maui a fair bit. My dad had a house over there, just at the start of the Maliko run, basically, and we went kite surfing we started off going in July, because my dad windsurfed. Yeah. And then pretty much from year 7 onwards, I think we went to Maui every our summer holidays, so winter over there. So we'd surf and kite surf. And one year I got into stand-up paddleboarding when it was over there, because I hurt my ankle, and it was like it's such a great place to holiday, because it was all the different water sports, and obviously so fortunate to be able to go over there and do that. But it was like, it really I guess like cultivated what I'm doing now, stand up, kite surfing, foiling. They all sort of progressed into what it is I'm doing. And I guess I'm probably getting a bit muddled up now, but did the Sunset event, and that led on to another event in Brazil, and I ended up doing a race event on an inflatable SUP. And I was staying with the same house as Casper, and I'm like, oh, I've done a little bit of the race stuff, but I'm not sure how I go. He's like, oh, I'll take my inflatable. He goes, you may as well just enter the races. I'm like, okay, so I did it, and I got to the semi-finals in the sprint race on the inflatable SUP. Yeah. And then I had like my chin up. I'm like, oh, here we go. I went to the distance race too, and I got absolutely smoked, as you'd expect. Like, an inflatable SUP probably isn't too far off the pace for a 50 or 100 meter race, whereas it's miles off the pace when you're punching into headwind. So it was a kind of a whirlwind year, from doing rugby, must have been 2016, and then or 2015, and then the SUP and surf and race stuff in 2016, 2017, and must have been 2016, or even 2015. I'm bad with dates, but I just remember it was around then. But it was a fun time, and lots has changed since then. But I look back at that.
So I guess early days, you're getting involved in. So you say you're doing all these different sports. You're doing rugby. You're doing probably doing league. I don't know, kite surfing, windsurfing, all these different sports. You're getting involved. You're going to Hawaii. You're sort of enjoying, I guess, the water sports, but then doing rugby. What was the key decision, I guess, for you when? I know you said when you went over to Hawaii, and it was really good, and you enjoyed Merimbula, obviously. Why was like the ocean drawing you so much more than, say, a contact sport where you're big and you're still solid? You're still solid now,
Yeah. It was a really easy decision, to be honest. I love rugby and the camaraderie from rugby, and it was kind of like when I was growing up, like my mum was sort of not pushing me, but she always encouraged me to do like your team sports, all the rugby, Aussie rules, soccer, cricket, nippers, all that sort of stuff. My dad was a bit more of a lone wolf and probably didn't care so much about social stuff. Yeah. He was more like, come on, James, we'll go for a surf. Just you and I, we'll go out to this outside reef and we'll have it all to ourselves and it'll be awesome. And like, so whereas mum was saying, we'll go to this birthday party and we'll play soccer with the kids. And so, it was probably a good balance. If I didn't have my mum's side, I'd probably be a hermit. And if I didn't have my dad's side, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I always really enjoyed the surfing stuff, but I didn't see, like, I guess there isn't the best part, like there's not a clear pathway, I guess, for a professional sports person like there is for rugby. Whereas I guess for rugby, I love the camaraderie. I love the sport itself. I love too. But I woke up every Sunday and every Monday, I was just completely broken. Like I remember multiple seasons, my right thumb would be jarred from like April through till the end of September when rugby finished.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you just like, I still get sore now, like paddling and foiling, but you don't get like bruised and broken bones and black eyes and a little bit of that, but like not as often, I guess, is the point. So I sort of saw a little bit more longevity in the water sports. I grew up doing them. I loved them. And I guess I just never thought I'd be able to do it professionally. And when I got that opportunity to go to Sunset and qualify for the stand-up world tour, it was like, well, maybe I should pursue this. I've always wanted to be like I grew up surfing. I competed at the local board riders, another sport that I was juggling. And I won the under 8, like the juniors, 1 or 2 years in a row. And at that point, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do surfing. And my dad never sort of pushed me into competitions. If I did them, he'd always support me. But he was like, don't do the competitive surfing. It's always in crap waves, which is, to some, unless you're in the sea too, it's kind of true. But so I never really saw it as a future. But when the stand-up stuff came around, it was like, oh, here we go. Here's an opportunity. And if I take it with both hands, maybe there is a, future for what I guess we're both doing now, which is, definitely brings a smile to my face that looking back.
When did you pick up your first stand-up paddleboard and what did you like about it?
Yeah, so in Maui, 1 year kite surfing, I was playing around with foot straps, and I at Kanaha, people have been to Maui, they'd know where Kanaha is, and there's a right-hander, and I was trying to pull into this barrel, and I just got it completely wrong. And basically I went over the falls with the kite, and the board attached to my back foot, not my front foot. So it twisted my right foot's ankle. So while I could still paddle, or like I could still sort of walk around, I couldn't pop up like doing a burpee and jumping up to my feet really aggravated the ankle. Yeah. So this was like halfway through the trip, and I'm like, oh, I've got 2 more weeks and the surf's pumping. Like, what am I going to do? So I think the first day we actually, as a family, we all went out to surf lowers at Kanaha, and I ended up just swimming out there. I put one flipper on my good foot and just sort of swam out and got to like body surf the waves out there, and then came in.
Yeah.
And then it's got to be a better way. Like body surfing's fun, but not when the waves are firing. So we went to the local shop, High Tech, and they had these stand-up paddle boards that, we'd only seen Laird Hamilton really like riding him at Hookeeper. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we should try this. So we hired 2 of them, and my dad and I paddled out at just by Mama's beach house on Maui. And we had we hired it for the rest of the 2 weeks, and I had the best surfs, like for someone that was like just a shortboarder, never really interested in stand-up.
Yeah.
Like just sort of taught myself to paddle, and the big enough boards, it didn't really matter, and we're just taking off on these outside reefs, no one else around, whereas Hookeeper was 30 to 40 guys out, competitive lineup. And I was like, man, this thing's pretty cool. Like you can make these waves that you wouldn't really shortboard super fun, and there's no crowds. Like, what the hell? Yeah. So we did that, and then we got home, and there weren't actually any stand-up paddleboards in Australia yet, like none that were production. So Sam Parker from WSS Boards actually had one. Like he'd seen it, and he got a local shaper to make up basically just a really big longboard. It was a red rails, and I don't remember what brand it was, but he had a paddle as well, and we borrowed that for a couple of days. And then we had to give it back to him because he's like, oh, I kind of want to do it myself. So we gave it back to him, and we went through my dad's shed and hit a bunch of old windsurfers, with the real like sandpaper deck.
Yeah.
And so we took that out, and we didn't have a paddle. Like, oh, what are we going to use? We looked in the garage, and there was this rake, an old plastic rake. And so we cut the prongs off it, and we went out at our local, like a spot we still surf now, and went out on that. And it was, I think we might have caught a wave. I don't remember actually catching a wave, but I remember getting out there and getting all rashed up. Yeah. But that was kind of the beginning, and that was, I think I was still at school then. So that was like 2009, 2009, 2008 sort of time period. And so I actually did sup surf a fair bit. My dad, when the boards came, we got a couple stand-ups, just, family ones, the big sort of 10-footers. And my mum bought some too. So we had this, we still have it actually. It's a 9.6, I want to call it a Whopper, but it was yellow. So it was a starboard.
Yeah.
But it was a yellow starboard.
Yeah.
And we still have it. It's a pretty fun board. It's pretty chunky now and dated, but it's still in one piece. And I use that board heaps. I remember surfing at Mona Vale, and a couple of the guys I used to surf board riders against, and they would, what are you riding that thing for? I'm like, mate, it's so fun. I was like, sort of nose riding, and there's a photo my mate took of me surfing it. That's the only time I can remember what date it was, but I think it was around that sort of 2010, 11 sort of time period. And I just love that I was always looking for more waves and less people. So stand up was a really easy answer. It's funny though, because my dad did Molokai in as I said, dates aren't a strong point for me, but shortly after that and before I'd started stand up racing, and we would surf while he would paddle to a certain spot. So we'd drop him off, and then he'd come paddle to where we were surfing.
Yeah.
And then paddle out and catch a few waves with us. And it was, I used to always think, like, what are you doing, Dad? Like, the surf's pumping. Why are you going paddling? Like, what a boring thing to do.
Yeah.
And like, I look back at, I guess, my attitude then and now, and especially the last sort of 8-9 years, and I've been paddling way more than I've been surfing. So it's full circle, I guess. But yeah.
So it sounds like you were involved in stand-up pretty early days. Like, I wouldn't have even really known what a stand-up was back in 2009. I think I first picked up my first paddle in like 2014, I think it was, for stand-up. And that was more so racing, only really coming from the surfing side. But it does sound like you really love the surfing, and it kind of gave you that freedom. That's what I used to like about Surf Lifesaving, the prone racing males, because I could go surfing, and like I used to surf okay. I surfed a lot as a kid, and we used to always run down to Hands Beach down there at Kays Beach all the time. But I found the prone and the males, you could just catch so many more waves, and you catch like 50 waves, an hour and a half. You just keep catching.
And you're not fighting anyone.
You're not fighting anyone. You got like a little Energizer bunny. Whereas when you're on a shortboard, you're sort of fighting people, and you've got to paddle more, and like you're not really catching the waves that you probably want to catch. So I can see how that stand-up surfing really sort of grabbed you, and you get to go to different places. But how did you find the kickback? There was a pretty solid kickback from the surfing community early days, and probably still a little bit now, but probably it's a little bit more accepted with, I guess, the global reach of stand-up paddleboarding now. But how did you sort of deal with that, or you just didn't care what people thought?
Yeah, it was a lack of caring of what other people thought, I guess. Like I think my dad's sort of, like I talked about before, my mum was more the social and dad was more the lone wolf. And we're pretty lucky here in Sydney that in the Northern Beaches, there are a few spots where people wouldn't surf. And we used to surf a spot out the end of Longreef. Yeah. We used to shortboard it a lot, and that was by ourselves pretty much, but it was a pretty crap wave. But on a stand-up, you can link all the deep sections. So, it'd be a wave that you could shortboard maybe 50 meters, and then down the line, there'd be another 50 meter section, down the line, another 50 meter section. On a stand-up, you'd link that wave and it'd be a 200 meter ride. So pretty lucky in that respect that, one, there weren't too many people out there. And two, if I did surf locally, I would surf Mona Vale, where I knew a lot of people, and they'd give me a bit of grief, but it was always like, I just laugh it off. And it was, to be honest, it probably spurred me on a little bit too. People saying, "Oh, what are you riding that for?" And it'd make me want to try to surf it better, to prove to them that it was something that you could rip on, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, it was definitely a bit of that. But in saying that, most of the time, and especially nowadays, like I'm surfing almost stand up I'm either surfing, I'm trying to avoid people, and you find your own bank, and, have it to yourself. It's what I was searching for way back in 2009, 10 or 11, whatever year it was. Yeah.
Empty waves. And so you have that progression. And when did you pick up a race board and a race paddle for the first time? And how did you get involved in that, going from, obviously your dad was doing it, so it seems like your dad was a big inspiration for you, but when did you start picking one up?
Yeah, so Dad kind of put the race board and the paddle away by the time I got into it. It was funny, his whole goal was Molokai, and it must have been 2012 or 2013. And I didn't pick it up until when I got into the stand-up. surf stuff, and I was doing that. It must have been that sort of lead up. A few mates of mine, now brother-in-laws, Grant and Scott Hardiman, were getting into the stand-up racing. I just got into the stand-up surfing sort of more competitively, like Merimbula, and I don't think I'd been to Sunset yet, but it was that sort of time period. And Grant was doing really well in this local SUP race scene, doing like a bunch of the races that New South Wales Paddle organise and Dean Gardner organises. So he was winning a few of these races, and I'm like, hey, I've been paddling for way longer than he has, like not racing, but I've like been riding a stand-up. I should be able to at least mix it with him.
Yeah.
So I hit up, and Sam Parker said to me, look, there's a race board here if you want to come train Tuesday, Thursdays with the Sydney Paddle Surf Club. So I started going to the trainings and went to a few of the races. And that summer, Grant and I had a really good sort of battle, back and forth, racing on the stand-ups. And there was one race in particular, Jake Jensen came down, and it was starting in Narrabeen Lake, paddling out at North Narrabeen and down to Fisherman's Beach. And on that race, I wasn't too far off Jake, and I'm like, oh, I might have a good crack at this. So whereas there were less SUP surf events and more races, I just sort of, gravitated towards that because there's just more opportunity, I guess. And I was doing well. So it was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And it sort of probably gave you an opportunity to, like, at the time, probably make a little bit of prize money and sort of go, okay, well, that prize money I can use to go here or do this race or experience this. Was there a little bit of that for you as well? Because I know there was for me, because that's eventually why I ended up in stand-up.
Yeah, I guess for me, it wasn't so much the prize money. It was more if I was going to that event to surf, I may as well do the race that's tacked on next to it as well.
Yeah.
And then the prize money obviously just spurred you on. So look, if I can put this money towards the next event, so that makes it really nice. Yeah. But I guess it was more chasing the lifestyle that, like, this, I guess I wanted to be a pro waterman, I guess, and like doing the surfing, doing the racing. It all sort of added up, and it was just, I loved being out in the water training. And as I did more of the, you'd know, but as you did more of the racing and you start to get results, it's really rewarding. Yeah. Whereas with the SUP surfing in competition, being I'm not that big, but I'm bigger than a lot of the guys I'm SUP surfing against. I'm using bigger boards. There was kind of a limit to the conditions I would be able to compete with them in. I've always been like, I've got sort of big flat feet and I'm not very light on my feet. So for surfing, if the surf was like under 2 foot, I wasn't able to compete with the Kai Bates or the Kai Lennies or any of those guys. But when I got up, 4 to 6 foot, I was competing with, the Kai Lennies and the Kai Bates and the Kai Vases and all those guys. So I would get pretty disappointed if I rocked up to an event and it was only 2 foot and I've flown all this way to do this event and the conditions don't suit me. I'm not even in the running. Yeah. Whereas when I'd go to places like Hawaii and it was, 4 to 6 foot plus, then I was in the running. But it was frustrating for me because I'm like, look, I know I can compete with these guys if the surf's good, but as soon as the surf gets bad, I'm just another number that's going to get knocked out in the early rounds. So doing the racing was like, well, I can do this event and the race next to it. Yeah. And what ended up happening was I'd want to train more racing than I would for surfing, because you'd get a reward. If you train more for racing, you would get a result. If you train more for surfing, it was fun, but if the conditions didn't suit, I wouldn't get a result. So gravitated towards it. And
that is the rewarding thing about training when it comes down to racing or stand-up racing or any sport in general. You can see the result at the finish line, whereas I've never really done a subjective sport, and I was probably drawn away from it early on because I was like, well, but they're just judging me. Like, I want to have something that's kind of more definitive. Like, if I cross the finish line, I get that result. And I was probably more like your dad, a bit more of a lone wolf, an individual. I just like doing my own thing and sort of gravitating towards the things I like, and I didn't really give a shit what people thought either. So it was like, for me, stand-up racing was that, and the experiences were just unreal. Like, you got to travel to so many cool places, and the opportunities were kind of endless. Like, I remember going, like, even really when I started taking it more serious, like 2016, and I'm traveling through Europe and doing all these different events. You're just like, I would have just never done this if I didn't do stand-up. there was just a race every weekend somewhere that you could go to, and you could people have a new experience, see the world. You know, like probably a little bit different stage at what I'm at now, anyway, and probably you, because I know you're not doing a lot of traveling at the moment, but. It's just cool to see how much that sport developed and gave guys like us such a cool opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. There was a real like window for me. I guess Molokai was always the race I wanted to do well in, because I'd go to Maui all the time and you'd hear about Molokai, and there were a lot of local guys on the Northern Beaches. Brad Gall, for example, that he actually took me under his wing and said, "Come on, we're going to go train. Molokai is the race you want to do well at." And yeah, for me, being able to go to Hawaii in July and just practice downwind runs and like be battling with friends, and it was, yeah, like you just, there's not many places you can go that you can do that. And the other thing that really drew me towards it was there was this community that you'd like, you know, you'd rock up to Maui and you'd meet all these people like-minded that are doing the same thing as you. And I'm sure it's the same. Like when you go to Hood River, it's the same. You meet all these guys that are into stand-up and they're into paddling, and you know, you chat to them, you're hanging out with them, and you just sort of nerd out on like SUP racing and board design and all this stuff that, like, my wife would be in the car sometimes when we're driving for a downwind run. She's like, "Oh, here they go again." You know, they're talking about downwinding and all these lines they take and fins and, you know, all this stuff that if you're into it was like just like kid in the candy store, but if you weren't, it was just like eye rolling, you know. So
well, for me, I'm super into it, and I love talking board design and fin shapes and paddle lengths, paddle sizes, like all these different things, and obviously how you step, how you walk, and all that type of stuff when you're downwinding. It's something that you're obviously right into too. You've done a lot of designing for boards and paddles and everything like that. How did you get involved in that type of thing? Was it just a general interest? I know you've done a bit of work with Sonova. I'm not sure who previously, but what was the driving force behind that? Was it just you just really enjoy nerding out?
Yeah, just loved it. Like, and how can I get quicker? You know, for the SUP race board, it was like I blame Marcus Tardrew for sure. he came to Hawaii one year, and we, you know, raced in WA a lot, King of the Cart and the Doctor, and I was actually better mates with Ben Tardrew at first, and at the time I was riding for JP, and I actually got a custom race board sent to Western Australia, because I said to them, "Look, your race boards for downwind are no good. Your flat water boards are really good. I'll sign with you guys, but let's work on your race board for downwind, because that's what I want to work. That's like my goal. I want to do well in downwind races." And like, "Yep, sweet, let's do it. We'll fly over to Thailand before King of the Cart, and you can fly back with a 14-footer. I was like, "Sweet, how good is this? They're going to make me a board specifically for the race." And I figured out it was a bit harder than just sort of getting a custom and it's going to work fine for the first time. Man, that board was really bad, basically. And it was like an eggshell too. I think I, you know, flew back with it, did one race, and straight away I knew, like, man, it's going to be a long 2 weeks, because there was, you know, there was the Sunset Ski Series, there was the Doctor, and there was King of the Cut. And yeah, Ben Tardrew, I remember him coming up to me after a race. He's like, "Mate, that was a good battle we had." He goes, "But if you're on a decent board, you would have flogged me." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "That thing sucks." Because he was coming from like a sailing background and was obviously really into it. And I'm like, sort of started picking his brain. And he's like, "Oh yeah, talking about this rockers, you know, volume and all this sort of thing." And he's like, I'm like, "Huh." So, you know, persevered with the JP thing for a while. And then Molokai was my main goal. And Matt Notich was getting a custom deep made for Molokai, and he was chatting to me about it, and I'm like, "Oh, so Marcus is making you a board custom?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I might ask him as well." He's like, "Yeah, you should. It might be cheaper if there's more of us ordering him."
Yeah.
So I called up Marcus and said, "Mate, what's this about Molokai unlimited boards?" He's like, "Oh yeah, making one for Notich, and then myself and Toby Cracknell as well." And then that year we had a bunch of issues with production that basically they were just too weak. They were really light, but they were too soft. Like, you know, always that balancing act. We want it super light, but is it going to last long enough for the race? And with all the races we're doing in Maui in July, basically it was just copping a flogging. And there were all these little spots that were stuffing up. And Marcus was stressing back home in WA. And he's like, "I'm going to fly over. I'm going to come over and fix the boards for you boys so you can race them." Because he obviously wanted us to race them so that he could have sort of a bit of a future in board design, which is now is designing for Sonova.
Yeah.
So he flew over, and Matt Nodich had actually used the wrong resin to try and fix where the rudder was loose, and he actually burnt a hole in his board. So what was a ding like this, it ended up being a ding like this, and it was just an absolute disaster. Marcus was like, man, that's beyond my capabilities. So he got that fixed at Dinking, and for my board, it was just the Venturi plugs were loose.
Yeah.
So I fixed that, and I was super thankful. And we were talking about board design and stuff. He's like, oh, do you mind if I come on your boat? I'm like, mate, I'd love you to come on my boat. So that was kind of the beginning of like Marcus and my relationship. And now we've sort of worked together for 5-6 years with Sonova, designing race boards and surf sups and now foil boards too.
Yeah.
So it's been, and yeah, so I blame Marcus for all the nerding out. And we used to have so many conversations over dinner in Maui, because he came over for the last week before Molokai. And my dad and myself and Toby and Nodich didn't seem to care as much, but we'd all just sit around the table and just talk about downwind and what would be better, dugouts, hollow boards, and now it's all, I guess, been done and sort of extinct. Unlimited's are done, it seems.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much Unlimited going on anymore. But I remember that patch where you guys just pumping out boards between you and Marcus, and it was kind of what foiling is, I guess, in a way at the moment. It's just constant progression.
Yeah.
Sort of, I guess the Unlimited stuff really reached that point, and then sort of the new sort of downwind type sport came in. Because I think the interesting thing about downwinding and going to Maui, going to Molokai and all that type of stuff, you are purely racing downwind. Same here in King of the Cut. Whereas I think where the sports seems to have moved now is more to all round conditions. You can paddle on the lake, you can paddle on the river, you can paddle on the ocean. It's sort of not that.
I think it's healthiest for the sport, I think, because you can't just have a downwind race, because not all places have downwind, whereas in this all round kind of down river, up river, crosswind, upwind, it's the best all round paddler that's going to win. What I loved about the downwind stuff was that it was kind of like surfing, and so you could kind of tap into that bit of energy and relax a little, and tap into that energy again, relax a little. So it was like downhill mountain biking versus road biking, or or all round sort of mountain biking. And I think, places like Europe, it's so cool to see the races that you're smashing, mate. It's the strongest guy is winning, the fittest and smartest guy is going to win. Whereas it's not I remember when I first started racing, I was the strong guy and I had no downwind skills. And I remember racing guys like Livio and Dave Kassane and Jeremy Riggs, and they just looked like, and Aaron Napoleon, and they just looked like they weren't paddling the whole time. And I was like, man, that's what I want to do. Whereas I was just paddling as hard as I could, into bumps and staying on the uphill and not getting down the downhill. And it was that bit. It was you couldn't just rock up for your first season paddling in Hawaii and expect to do well, because you had to have some sort of downwind experience. Whereas this was a bit of a barrier. Whereas this sort of all round racing that's happening now, it's anyone from anywhere can rock up as long as they've done the work in conditions that they're going to be racing, and it's going to be they're going to have a good crack at winning it. And because it's more rounded, I guess.
I think as you say, it is healthier for the sport, because it does open up opportunities to people who don't have access to ocean conditions. You only see the downwind type activities happening maybe on the west coast of France, Australia, Hawaii. And that's kind of it. Kind of it. Whereas obviously there's such a big hold of the sport in Europe now, and probably in America a little bit, but most of those people are in landlocked places and they're paddling on lakes and rivers and stuff. So it is more accessible and it does grow the sport. But let's just go back to talking about you. Segue way too much. Talking about Molokai, where obviously you had all that progression, you're going over to Hawaii every year. You eventually win the race. Can you talk us through the years of development and the trials and tribulations that you had leading up to winning it? Because obviously that was the goal for a long time, but it didn't happen straight away.
So it was 5 years of the race, but it was actually 6 years like 6 summers in Maui of just downwind paddling. The first year I went over there, Molokai was super competitive just to get onto the start line. And I put my name in. It was a lottery back then. So you put your name in the lottery, and if you didn't have past experience, you'd done the race before, you weren't sort of just accepted in. So I put my name in. I was like, fingers crossed I get in. And I didn't get any replies. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm not in. But Brad Gall was training. He was doing SUP that year, and he actually paddled Molokai with Tom Carroll. And Tom had a really bad knee that year. Like, he wasn't sure he was going to be able to race. And Brad Gall was like staying with me for a week or so in my place in Maui. And he was like, just make sure you stay around till the race, because Tom might not be able to race and I need you as my backup. And I'm like, oh, that'd be pretty cool to, like, you know, do Molokai with a past champ, albeit prone, but he was going to do stand up, and it'd be awesome just to sort of see the lines he takes.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of stringing me along, and TC was always doing the race. His knee was shot, but he trained enough, and he was like, no, I'm just going to rest. I'm just going to do the race. And if it's too bad. So I think I ended up leaving the 1 or 2 days before Molokai, but I did that year. I did Molokai to Maui to Molokai. I did the Maliko races, and I did the 4th of July race. So I sort of had a bit of a, I guess, introduction to the downwind paddling in Hawaii. And on that, I'd been going to Maui for, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years. And we lived just above Maliko Gulch. And when I did my first Maliko run, I was just like, what? Like, how did I not know this was here? Like, it was like this downwind ski run that we used to always just drive down, because we used to always drive down to Kanaha to kite. And like, we literally would have to drive along the run to get to the kiting spot.
Yeah.
And I said to my dad, like, why didn't you tell me this was here? He was like, I did, but you weren't interested. You were too busy surfing and kiting and didn't want to downwind. I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. So I was super lucky that, like, I could literally, and then that summer I'd literally paddle to Kanaha every day. And I'd actually try to do 2 or 3 shuttle runs. There was the Maliko shuttle, and I'd sign up for 2, like, I guess, shuttle runs back up to the start. And I got some serious reps done that first year. Like, I think I did 3 Maliko runs a day, like 3 or 4 days a week. And then like every other day was like 1 or 2. So I was like doing 45 Ks a day some days, and all downwind. But it was really cool to sort of learn how to downwind. And then doing the race, obviously you'd sort of see where you're at. But it was, I guess, the biggest learning was less is more, basically. And instead of going at your cadence, 60 strokes a minute, you actually, I remember on the shuttle run back up, I think Jeremy Riggs was in the shuttle, and he said to me, maybe it was Dave Cassane. It was one of those, guys, older guys that were like really like knowledgeable about downwind. Could have been Dave Plummer. He was like, just this run, just because he knew I was on like a 2nd or 3rd run of the day. He's like, you'll probably be tired this one, but maybe just try to paddle a little bit less. Like just try to feel a little bit more. And I was like, oh, well, my times have been the same all week. Maybe I'll try this paddling less thing.
Yeah.
And so I tried it, and sure enough, I was like, oh, I just did my fastest time, and I've just done 2 runs beforehand.
Yeah.
And it was like the moment it clicked, okay, so it's not how fast can I paddle, it's how can I get my board to run for longer, I guess. And so that was the sort of light bulb moment. And then I started sort of understanding that a little bit more. And then Travis Grant came over for Olokai one year, and I managed to get a paddle in with him. He's like, oh, come on, James, we'll get you. I want to test the board. It'd be good if you could test it with me. So we went out in his NSPs and we tried out these boards. And he was like, try not to paddle. He was like, try to go sideways a little bit more. And so, Travis is coaching me before Olokai, and he goes, I'm obviously not a threat, so I'm just paddling too much. But he goes, just try to go sideways a little bit more. And so I did that, and another light bulb. It was like, okay, so it's not about point A to point B. It's about be as smooth as you can by sort of linking the bumps. And so, those little light bulbs went off. And then that following, so Olokai was in May or April, and then that following winter or summer in Hawaii, Matt Notich came over, and he was a really good outrigger canoe paddler, like really good downwind. he sort of had it from when he like sort of grew up paddling. And we did a whole season in July paddling the stand-ups. I think now they were the SICs that year, but they were paddling stand-ups, and we were inseparable the whole way down the run. Every run was a race, and every run I was just following his line, and it was like the lines he was taking, and so I was just a sponge, taking in all the knowledge I could, and I guess that sort of was halfway through that. Then I would beat Nottage every single run from after the first week, and he's like, "Oh, you figured it out." That's not fair. Like, you're just a dumb, strong paddler, and now you're starting to combine your strength with like a bit of finesse.
Yeah.
And that was the real, I guess, clicking point. And Nottage only beat me if it was a really big sort of downwind run, and he was like, moving his feet heaps on a narrow board. And if it was a bit lighter, I guess I would. But yeah, it was just all those little tips and all those people along the way helping me understand the downwind stuff. I guess helped me for Molokai. And in terms of my Molokai races, for me, my first one was like flat and a south swell against us. So we had current, we had hot conditions, we had no wind. And that year, it was my first year and I came 5th. So it was my first year in Molokai. And Slater Trout was there, Connor Baxter, Kai Lenny, all these guys. And there was this list, I was looking at the start list, I'm like, look, if I can get top 10, I'll be pretty happy. And all these guys dropped out. I think 5 or 6 people dropped out. And I looked at all those people dropping out. I'm like, man, there's no way I'm dropping out. This, Boothie, it's like escort boats, time away, training from Australia, early mornings in the cold. I'm like, there's no way I'm dropping out of this race. It's first time I've gotten into Molokai and I'm putting everything into it.
Yeah.
And I was super stoked to come 5th that first, pretty sure it was 5th, 6th or 5th. Anyway, it was way better than I thought I was going to go.
Yeah.
And then the next year, I think I came 5th or 4th or something. And then each year I'd get better and better. So it was 6th, 5th, 4th. And then I came 3rd in 2018. And I'm like, oh, hopefully I can get 2nd next year. And then we had a good race. And 2019, the last time I ran, we had a good race, but I ended up getting the win. But it was, I guess, a culmination of board design, knowledge from Nottage, Jeremy Riggs, Kalama, Marcus Tarju when he came over. We would sort of same thing I was doing with Nottage, we were sort of following each other's lines all the way along. And that was a really, I guess I look back on that really fondly, that 5-6 year period, and feels like ages ago because COVID's kind of come and sort of put a full-on stop to it. But I don't think it'll ever happen again because I'll probably be foiling next time.
Yeah, well, it is quite interesting, that whole journey, and how I guess that experience and that constant, I guess, trying and changing, developing, learning, that's kind of what makes the results so much better as well. I think
sure.
You had to spend so long to get to that, and just having that constant feedback with Marcus, learning from all those people that you spoke about just then. I think that's really key as an athlete in general, is to actually not think you know everything, but actually take in information from a lot of different people. And that's one of the key things I think now as a coach, and I'm sure you probably say the same thing, try and absorb information from everybody and then find out what works for you. And I think it's a real key principle that you obviously know now. It's just so key. And then going into that 3-year period with no Molokai, and then maybe next year they don't do, maybe they do 14 foots again or something, because no one really has it anymore. So it doesn't really make sense to do unlimited. So
it'll be
interesting if they do it again, or how they do it, and if they'll have interest, as well, because even someone like yourself who's a previous winner probably won't do it.
Yeah, it's like you said, Marcus and I put a lot of time into different design boards. We started we were on SIC, sort of flat, sort of looked like oversized surfboards, and we went sort of dug out sort of more towards surf skis and outrigger canoes basically. And there is literally a garage full of probably 12 unlimiteds plus a bunch of friends stuff sitting in Maui, and it's what are we going to do with them? It's no one on Maui is paddling them anymore. And before that, only people in Maui were paddling them. So it's like, yeah, it's a funny little time. And I guess on the taking in the knowledge stuff, at the time there was no coaching services. Like Jeremy Riggs would take you for a downwind paddle, and I did that once or twice when a 2-man canoe, and I learnt heaps just paddling with him on that, and that was like eye-opening. But just the comments from Dave Kalama and Jeremy Riggs and Dave Kassane, and they'd never give away too much. When I was training in summer back home in Sydney, I used to do lots of downwind runs with Dave Kassane, and we'd do the shuttle up. He'd sort of pick me up, we'd drive up to the start and get down to the finish. He'd always be picking his brain and the drive up, and he's like, "That's all right, you're pretty close, James. You'll get there soon." And he'd never give away. He'd just give away like a 1% of a tip. Yeah. And he'd just be like, "Oh," and if he ever said like, "Oh, just try a higher cadence, or just try going left a little bit more." It was just a one-liner, and he wouldn't expand on it. I'd ask him, "Well, what else? Well, what else?" And he's like, "No, I don't want to confuse you. You're doing a pretty good job already."
Yeah.
I think nowadays with like yourself, you've got Boothie, you're coaching and I'm coaching, and there's all sorts of people like Danny Ching, and there's access to all these coaches that you can upskill over maybe 3 months, rather than like what I explained was upskilling over 6 years. So it was like I was fumbling away in the dark, and now there's like I've got courses online where you can literally learn the downwind lines to take, learn the strokes to take, learn even paddle skills. I did a few technique sessions with Doris, and that definitely helped a little bit. And then a mate of mine, Scott Hardiman, he went and did a course over in the US, and he sort of shared some of the knowledge that he learnt there with, what was his name? I can't remember the guy. The course he did was over in the US, but there just weren't many people coaching, and they weren't online platforms. You'd have to go and visit this person and do a one-on-one session with them. And basically, there was no one in Sydney who was coaching stand-up at the time. So I think nowadays people are lucky if they really want to do well at it. Like for a pretty small cost, they're going to be able to do that. Get really good advice, which unless you're traveling to the races, you're not going to get that any other way.
Yeah, it is excellent, I think, with all those online training platforms as well. And I think for us as well as people who love being around the ocean, it sort of gives us a job to help people in the first instance to get that progression, but allow us to stay amongst like water sports, because if we didn't have that platform to coach and to earn that income, it probably would, well, for me, for example, I probably have to get drawn into, I don't know, like everyone else over here, end up doing a FIFO mining job, because that's basically what every single person in WA does. So to be able to foster that and stay around water sports and stay around that by doing this coaching and helping people like achieve their goals in less than 6 years is really, really good, and I guess fulfilling for myself as a coach. So going into, I guess, other competitions, had a couple of wins at King of the Cut. For a while there, that was a really big event for stand-up paddling in Australia in general, probably for that 10-year period. You had some really good names, like you had the Bo O'Briens winning it, Jake Jensen, I think Tituan Puyo, you used to have Travis Grant coming over for it. It was kind of like the mecca of the downwind sport.
Yeah, it was the Aussie Hawaii. Everyone was coming over for King of the Cut, and it was I made some great battles. I had a couple of races where it was like before I signed with Sonova, it was just so frustrating. Like I knew what I wanted or what I thought I wanted to do, and obviously my skills weren't quite there yet. But I think I had 2 or 3 doctors and King of the Cuts on boards that just weren't right. Yeah, and it was just there was a point there, and that. And this, Boothie, on the some of the boards you've paddled before as well. It's like it's just the wrong board for the day, and you could be the best paddler in the world, but you're not going to make that board work for those conditions. And that knowledge wasn't common knowledge. So for board designers who were in Thailand or Europe, they didn't understand what King of the Cut or Hawaii needed. Yeah. So it was definitely some frustrating years, and then once I kind of had the right equipment and the right knowledge, it was just the best. Like it was like, oh, here we go. Like it's going to be a race with yourself and even training. Like I'd be paddling with Marcus a lot, and Marcus and I'd be sort of the same, and I'm like, man, I'm way stronger than Marcus. Why is he right next to me? But King of the Cut was just like Hawaii. It was just a downwind mecca, and we had some it seemed like every year the wind was for King of the Cut was always a bit light, but it was still downwind, and it was, you know, it was just a it was just a place to go and get excited about downwind, and just an epic week of. There's like, I think if you came for 8 days, you could literally get the Doctor, 2 Sunset Surf Ski Series races in, King of the Cut, and then there was the Mandurah Dural as well.
Yeah.
A couple of years. So you get 5 races in like 8 days, which was, you know, just sponge stuff, you know, just soaking it all in and chatting to people, and really good times.
Yeah, it's such a big event. I'm not sure if they're going to do it again this year. Well, hopefully they do it. And obviously the other big event in Australia that I know you did a lot was the 12 Towers. That was such a big race here in Australia, and probably just talking about the sport in general, seeing it sort of change in a way, because a lot of the people in Australia seem to be like early adopters who were stand-up paddlers. So now you see the foilies. We probably go into that a little bit, but I guess for me, where do you see the sport of stand-up paddling going for now, and how do you see it in Australia? Because Australia is like quite a interesting, I guess,
case study. Yeah.
See, like Europe and say America's probably really kicking into gear. I'd say Europe's really pumping. Asia seems to be really pumping as well. But then Australia, recreationally, probably big, but sport-wise, it's in a weird spot.
Yeah, I think Australia is a really interesting case study for stand-up because, like you said, they're the early adopters, and that sort of created this sort of like surge of, you know, interest. And I think you and I kind of probably missed that initial surge and kind of came at the plateau. Like we came when it was a lot of people already in it. I was like, oh, how cool is this? And it's like, it's growing, you know, because it was at that point, we all thought it was still growing really fast, this rapid rate. But in the last 2 years, especially, the interest, I think with COVID, a lot of races being cancelled and foiling coming along. It's just been in New South Wales anyway. I'm not sure how it's like in WA, but like we had our state titles last weekend, and they actually had to cancel the marathon because they only had 3 entrants.
Yeah, wow.
Which was like, and then they held the tech race, and I think there were 10 people, but there probably were another 10 that might have come if the marathon was on, because you come up. Most people would prefer to paddle a marathon than a tech race.
Yeah.
Because you can train for it, sort of more like that surfing racing sort of thing we were talking about before.
Yeah.
So, and then for the SUP surfing, it was kind of a little bit less, but kind of the same old faces, not many fresh faces.
Yeah.
So I guess what I've seen in the SUP space here in Sydney is heaps of people getting into foiling.
Yeah.
And there are new people getting into SUP racing too, but it's like the core, like the nucleus of people that were SUP racing are now not. Like they're just, because they weren't races for a while, and then they learned to foil, and they just got this like they're foil brained. They just got the full on bug. They don't want to, like, guys will go out on Tuesday, Thursday mornings on their foil boards while the SUP racing training is going on with like 2 or 3 other people, you know. So it's like there'll be 8 guys foil surfing and 3 guys SUP race training, and those 8 guys used to be SUP race training with the 3. You know, so it's like this big old shift. And I don't think that's a reflection of I'm not sure that's like reflection of everywhere, but it definitely is the case here in Sydney. But there are, like, I've done a few, like there's been people that have signed up for my courses just for SUP racing. I've done one-on-one, like one-on-one in-person technique sessions for guys like on Narrabeen Lake. Yeah. Just when I thought that, like, I take it off my website because no one's ordering them.
Yeah.
But it's, then people book it. So it's like there definitely is people that are coming into the sport and wanting to learn SUP race skills, but it's hard because there's probably, if they sign up to a race, there'd probably only be 10 people at it on SUPs, and the rest will be on skis and everything else. So it's a funny time for SUP in Australia, I think. And 12 Towers, it is still running this year, I think, but I haven't heard much. I saw a date that was released, but I haven't heard anything else. King of the Cut, speculation.
You mean King of the Cut, not 12 Towers? 12 Towers is definitely stopped, right?
No, 12. If you Google 12 Towers, there's a date for this year.
Is it just Peasy's just not doing it now? I actually haven't spoken.
Peasy's not doing it, yeah. But I'm not sure who took over. I chatted to Michael from SurfFX, and he said that the guy who took it over has a few other things going on, so he may not be able to run it this year. But I'd love for it to run. But yeah, Peasy's not running it, so it's kind of and that's sort of the same thing. Like he was like the nucleus, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure if Peasy's foiling. I'm pretty sure he's still paddling.
Yeah, I think he's
race
still.
birds.
We'll have to have a chat to him, but I
Have
think
to have a chat to Peasy, yeah.
the paddle progression stuff still. I'm pretty sure he still has a squad up on the Gold Coast there. But yeah, it's quite an interesting case I guess we've spoken about before, because he had that really core group of people probably for the 8 years or so, and then 2018, 2019, it seemed to fall away as sort of Europe and that picked up.
Yeah.
But then the pandemic kind of accelerated that. But what I'm seeing, I guess, especially here in WA, like I probably don't do as much stand up with the groups and all that type of stuff over here, but see Perth's up and that there's a kind of like a new nucleus coming through that's really supporting this up racing scene. So, and I think with the different types of racing, when you've got Paddle Australia now getting probably more involved, and Surfing Australia doing what they've always done, just a little bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah, it's a side project. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting time, but I like with talks of the sport being in the Olympics of 28, and I think there's going to be definitely more interest coming from that. So that'll be nice. Progresses but yeah, you do see those foiling and early adopters and those people sort of really pushing through. And I had an interesting chat with Connor recently on the previous Boothcast. For him and for me as well, like I love foiling to a point where I was like progressing. And I hit that plateau where I was like, okay, well, where do I go to here? Do I put straps on my board? Do I start jumping? Do I, like I was, you call it like mowing the grass when you're sort of going back and out.
Yeah, back and forth. Yeah.
And I just kind of like, okay, well, this is not that exciting for me personally. If I'm going to spend 3 hours doing something, maybe I should split it up and do 2 sessions in the day and get some workout done. So for me, I love the progression of learning, but once I plateaued, it was kind of like, where to now? And that's got kind of a question for you. Where does foiling go now? Like foiling is such a cool, fun, recreational sport, and you do see a wing foiling tour kind of happening already. Is that where it goes? But is that windsurfing or is that foiling?
Yeah, so to me, the wing foil tour isn't what I would have any aspirations of doing as it stands at the moment, because it seems to be more freestyle or slalom, and there's not many wave riding aspects to it. And I guess for me, I'll always fall back on like surfing, and so like because I'm surfer first, so it's like wave riding is, while I hate that it's subjective, but wave riding is, I guess, what I love, and downwind is an extension of that, and downwind foiling is kind of like an extension of that extension, and it's like I love that. For the winging, the stuff I like about winging is I tow myself into the wave with the wing, and compared to other wind sports like kite surfing, when you're on the wave, you've got the kite pulling you. With the wing, it's just you're towing the wing, and it's it's out of the wave, so it's like you're literally just wave riding on your foil.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see like a surf foil tour pop up, or I think there's scope for a downwind foil sort of scene to pop up. I think Molokai not happening has probably put a bit of a stall to that. But in saying that, there aren't many people that know how to downwind foil. It's growing, but there haven't been many people that would even compete in that sort of event. I think if Molokai happens next year, I think there'll be a lot of foil entrants, just because the guys in Hawaii, and there's been enough time, I guess, from when Kai won it last to now, I guess that's about 4 years time, for people to learn and be capable of doing the crossing. But yeah, it's going to be, I think it's the problem with foiling, I think, is there's so many ways to do it, which is also the beauty of foiling, so like people are pumping around in circles in lakes, people are surfing in waves, people are downwinding out to sea, and it's like, well, what's our foil tour going to look like? And it's not clear. And then how do you judge a foil surf heat when people are double dipping? And there's just too many little headaches that are preventing it from that next step. I think the racing, like the wing foil racing, will probably take off. I think someone should start a flat, or like just a racing series, whether it be with a paddle, whether it be with a wing, whether it be dock starts. I see that as a pretty cool like like foil cross kind of event. I reckon that'd be pretty epic. But to me, foiling seems like it's in its infancy. It's kind of like stand-up was like in 2012. I'm not sure when it really did that spike because I wasn't really in the know. But, it's before that, competitive spike going on. And so I'm really enjoying it because, like you said, like there is that I feel like I'm still in that learning curve. I'm still learning and coaching it. I'm understanding what people are interested in learning, and it's been really not strange, but like the flat water paddle up, so like paddling up on your stand up, has been something that a lot of people that have never even surfed before want to learn.
Yeah,
because they can learn to foil in lakes, and it's more controllable than like your dock starts.
Yeah.
So it's like you can be less coordinated, I guess, and still learn how to do it.
Yeah.
It's like more accessible. Stuff like the foil drive, like, a prop that you can literally bolt onto your foil and get going. So it's like an e-foil basically, but it's once you're up on foil, the motor's out of the water, which is epic. It's just like, I use that to teach. A lot of the time I'll start them in a lake and just get them to e-foil, and then we'll go into the ocean and move the prop up higher, and they can catch open ocean swells, like kind of downwinding, but in a controlled environment, like blue waves, I guess I call them. They're not broken waves.
Yeah.
So it's foiling is it's exciting to me because there's so many different progressions, and now helping access with design of foils. And I'm trying to, sort of like I was with the downwind boards, like how do we make this foil go faster, turn better, ventilate better, and all the above. And it's more complex than race boards, I think.
Yeah,
they're smaller, but there's more, there's different aspects that, for downwind, for example, you need a foil that lifts early so you can get going, but then you want it to go as fast as possible because once you're up and going, you want to be going quick. So everything's a compromise, and you make a foil smaller, it's harder to get up, but it's better once you're up. So I guess that's probably keeping me excited about the foil stuff. And like I still love racing my stand up. I'm probably paddling my stand up or my race board maybe once a fortnight at the moment. But the downwind foil stuff, I sort of group that together with training because it's it's long periods of cardio.
You do your 200 plus kilometers. We'll go into that in a second. But for me, I guess there's just so much to talk about there. Like when you're talking about it's so complex, so in a way complicated at the moment as to where it will progress.
It is.
As a sport, or will it just remain like a recreational fun activity? Like kind of like surfing has become, but then it became a subjective sport in its own where it gets.
I think
see some events in Florida.
A
type of that, but it's really in its infancy and it's really controlled. I guess my next question is, who organises this stuff? Like, is it SUP federations? Is it surfing federations? Is it windsurfing? Is it sailing? Like, what is foiling? Or is foiling its own whole thing, and it's got to develop that way?
Yeah, and I think with the whole SUP ISA ICF thing that we've seen going down, it's like you almost hope that it does become its own thing because of the mess that was. In saying that, it looks like the wing foil tour, that's obviously more of a wind sport, like kite surfing, windsurfing. Like they seem like, I know Kite Surfing Australia has run a bunch of wing foil races. I haven't done any of them because I've been away or busy at the time, but it's interesting that the wind sports are getting into the wing foil stuff before any of the surf foil stuff. So like I was chatting to Surfing New South Wales, trying to help them run a SUP event down in Berry, and I said, oh look, we should probably include a foil division because it's like that's what's popular at the moment in Sydney. Like I know like 50% of my mates who I used to SUP race against are now foiling, so I'm like, you'll get entrance if you run a foil event, and I can't guarantee you will with a SUP race event. And they're like, oh well, we're just kind of on the fence at the moment because of the eastern suburbs foil or potential foil ban that's going on. It's like they've banned foiling in Bondi, Maroubra. So like you can't surf foil in those spots when the flags are up, so when it's patrolled.
Yeah.
And technically, I think not, but there's no one to tell you you can't if the beach isn't patrolled. I've got a bunch of mates over on the eastern suburbs who are fighting that. And I'm not sure it's a hard rule at the moment, but it's there's that happening. And so Surfing New South Wales has sort of put their hands up in the air and been like, I don't want to know about foiling right now. Let's let them sort that out.
Yeah.
And then from there, and I'm saying to them, there's an opportunity for them to run an event and sell it out. And they're like, we're not getting into the politics of that. And so it's a bit of a bummer.
And why are they banning things over there? Is it because of like there's been multiple incidents, or it's just been people complaining?
I think just salty old surfers.
Okay. So there's been no like real hectic incidents or anything like that.
Not that I know of. I know there's been probably close calls.
Yeah.
I know in the Northern Beaches there's been maybe it was in the harbour. I ran into a guy when I was probably 2 years into foiling. He's like, "Oh, don't take that out. I nearly died. I got the foil to the jugular, and it like you almost had to go to the hospital and like nearly died," kind of thing.
Right.
But it was a Christmas party, and he was like 3 or 4 beers in, and it's like it was just like, come on, mate, you were doing it. If you don't know how to foil and you're going to try to learn to foil in your Christmas party, it's probably going to end up poorly. So there's all of that, and just foils going. It's the unknown. People are afraid of the unknown. Same as like they probably wanted to ban SUPs on the eastern suburbs of, as you know, crowded. There's not that much real estate on the beach. And for someone who's pumping around, like I know mates who live on the eastern suburbs, and they're foiling, and what they're trying to do is stay on foil for an hour. For like their entire session, they're on foil, and so they're buzzing around surfers, which obviously is like, oh, I don't know what that is, I don't know how that works, but they're moving fast and it looks sharp, so it must be dangerous. Which kind of. I think on the northern beaches, there's more space on the northern beaches, so it's like you can spread out a bit more. And there's still incidences. I know at a few, like one of my local beaches, a kid was foiling through the lineup, and one guy, he fell off next to one guy that was pissed off, and he just punched him in the head because he was just like, don't do that here. And just, that was sort of the end of that. But it was just, foiling in some respects is worse than SUP, fear factor wise. A SUP, a board is big and a paddle is hard. A foil is smaller, you can duck dive it, but it's moving faster and it's going in places that people aren't used to seeing people move fast. So it's really up to those people that are doing it now to not foil around large groups of people. And you have last right of way on a foil, basically. Like that doesn't mean people can drop in on you, but it means if there's 10 guys out a surf spot that looks really good and there's no one out the next bank over, you go to the next bank over. And
I used to do that anyway. Like even if I used to paddle out and just use shortboards, I have like 10 guys, no guys. I just go anyway. Like even if it's just shit away, I'm waiting for to surf that spot. So but what is the solution, do you think?
I think it's honestly, I think it's common sense. And I think a bit of education. Like a lot of people think that foils are knives, and foils are actually more blunt than most surfboard fins. Marcus can vouch for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, turtles, Marcus.
The quabber fins. So there's certain surfboard fins that are definitely, like I can guarantee, are much sharper than 90% of foils. But it's a new sport. People are moving fast, and surfers are in Sydney. And it's like it'd be like foiling at Trig. You know what I mean? Like you just wouldn't do it because that's the surf spot. That's why personally I've been pushing the downwind foiling more than anything else. I think surf foiling is awesome and I love surf foiling, but there's going to be a time where there's going to be too many foilers, like there are too many surfers now in a surf spot. Whereas for downwind, it's like there will never be too many downwind foilers, because if you're out to sea, like, most of the time when I downwind foil, I see no one, and then if you do, you see 2 or 3 people and you're stoked to see them. It's like, oh, what are you doing out here? Like, it's fun. Whereas surf foiling, like 3 or 4 of your mates is good, but when there's 20 other foilers out and you're in one spot, it's generally borderline dangerous, I would say.
And do you think going forward as well, like with the progression into downwind, because that's where I found like I really enjoyed
Mm,
foiling was downwind foiling, but the limitation to the racing type of thing was obviously the foil design, the weight of the paddler, and just trying to be competitive. Whereas I was sort of like, well, I'm just going to do it for fun.
mm,
I actually honestly didn't paddle a foil over summer, which I was pretty surprised about, but
mm.
my foils got put in storage, and then I was like doing obviously a lot of surf life saving and coaching, and
Yeah,
just didn't have time. So like every afternoon I was down the beach like coaching the kids, so I wasn't able to do it. But that was definitely something for me where I was like I sort of learned from Nathan a little bit over here, Sup Perth or whatever he is on Instagram, and he was kind of like, oh, why would you go fast? Like, because me and Mark used to like try and race and like type of stuff early, like probably early pandemic stuff.
yeah,
And I was like, yeah, like that's kind of where I should be at. Like I started like almost like not taking my watch and just like trying to surf and enjoy the downwind run because I definitely didn't have the fastest foils and like the amount it was progressing and the amount of time that I could actually spend on it as kind of like a intermediate foiler, I guess. It wasn't really worth it to me to try and go super fast because I just couldn't keep up. Like even if I tried, the guys were just on faster foils. So I was like, well, let's just try and enjoy and go sideways a little bit more, like you mentioned earlier, and just enjoy it. So I
yeah.
think there's that. But yeah, how do you combat that? It's like someone who's like I don't know, you must be like 85 kilos, I don't know, something like that when you're
Yeah.
at race weight. And then you've got someone like the young kids coming through, like Jeffrey Spencer or something like
Mm.
that, who's 50 or I don't know, a lot of even the SUP
Yeah.
guys who are doing foiling are like under 70.
Yeah.
How do you compete with that? Say when you go to Molokai hopefully next year when you're doing the foiling, how do you compete?
Again, it's kind of like the surf conundrum where I'm not going to be able to compete with them if it's, um, 10 knots. Obviously they're going to be able to get up on smaller foils than I am. But you would be hopeful that the conditions change throughout the race and that there will be a point where they're going to be overfoiled. And it comes down to foil choice too. And like the way I sort of see it is you're going to have a quiver. You have a quiver of sort of three foils. You got your under 10 knots, you got your 10 to 20, and you got your 20 plus.
Yeah,
And pretty much you'll try to narrow it down to, okay, if it's 10 knots, I'll use my big foil, 10 to 20, moderate,
yeah,
20 plus, fast. And obviously there's more than just wind speeds, there's swells and period and all that sort of stuff as well. But it will change. So if say Jeffrey Spencer's on, he's got his 10 knot plus foil, he'll be able to go quicker than me on that. But when it's over 20 knots, because I'm heavier, I'll be able to go quicker than him unless he's sort of scaled them. So like for example, when I was over in it says if it's super windy, a heavier guy is going to be able to go quicker. And if it's super light, a lighter guy will be able to go quicker. But it all comes down to the foil you choose and I guess the research and development and testing that you've done. So I believe that it's still going to be, it's Formula One. You've got to be in the right car to have a chance. But almost more than that, you've got to make the right choice based on conditions. So it's like the race starts by reading the forecast, I think, or like testing the conditions, which, I used to do some weather forecasting. So for me, that's really exciting. I enjoy that sort of aspect to it too. But for sure, it's an arms race, but less so than what it was, I think, in 2019, because all the foils are getting good. And the first foil race I did against people was a Maliko run, and I was on a Maliko 200, so like one of the original Go foils that were thick and turned down. And I got up one of the first to get up, and I remember thinking, okay, I've got a good shot here. Been foiling heaps, and before I even get to Hukipa, people have just gone past me like I'm not moving.
yeah.
And so, like you were saying with Nathan, I went out to sea. And I'm like, maybe there's a bit of current out there, but I'm just going to go out to sea and just surf. And I just had fun for the run. It was epic, and there were people around, and it was like there were boats out there, and it was like a for the love of it sort of thing, but only because I realized I wasn't up to the pace. So it's like, you want to know. That's why I said like Molokai is going to be a big one, and I think Hood River this year too, to see what foils are the quickest for certain people in certain conditions. And that's kind of the cool thing, is like Hood River conditions are so different to Hawaiian conditions.
Yeah.
So and again, they're different to Australian conditions, are different to, and East Coast to West Coast, and even the Gold Coast versus Northern New South Wales is super different too. So there's so many aspects to it. And I think those that put the time in are going to probably have the most benefit. But I'm talking about like it's a sport, and it so isn't. Like, it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just,
but it sounds
right
like
at its infancy.
The prospect of it becoming a sport sounds like the infancy of your 6-year progression when you were talking about
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
went on the unlimited. So now it's like, okay, well, this is kind of like your new thing. It's kind of like breathing life into your competitive edge. So for you, what does racing look like this year? Like, will you get on a stand-up? Will you mainly just do the foiling stuff? Or are you not really racing? Like, how is it looking for you? Will you go to Hood River?
Yeah, so I've never done Europe, so that's not that I don't like Europe. I love Europe, but the racing, I've always been pretty open that I love the downwind stuff. So the downwind stuff for me is kind of where it's at. Hood River was on the radar, but I only wanted to go with my wife and son would come, and they're like, maybe it's too soon. Basically, Kobe would only be like 3 or 4 months old, so it was like. And what I'm going to do instead this July, we're doing a road trip up to Cairns as a family, and just sort of stopping off and exploring, visiting a few shops, running a few foil camps, and then doing the Great Barrier Reef Ocean Challenge. Which, have you heard of that race before?
I've won it many years.
You won it. I was going to say, I bet you probably raced it.
Before foils even existed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going up there. That's my plan anyway. We're going up there, and I want to foil it. Ben Tarju and I were talking about doing it last year, and it got canned because the border, or I couldn't go because I was in New South Wales, and the borders were closed. This year we're going to drive up, and there's 2 races. There's a 17-kilometer one weekend, and then a 40-something kilometer one the weekend after. Yeah. And so I'm going to head up and see if we can get a bit of a foil crew to that, and sort of.
So that's the plan.
That's up to July or end of July. So that's August. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it's just very different, I guess, to the race plan that you probably used to do. So it's But how was your perspective changed through the pandemic? Like I guess you were still racing. You won Molokai and King of the Cut in 2019, I think it was. You probably had a good really race scene. You were still on go foils, like you were kind of early stages downwinding, doing, I think you might have done like a 100K challenge that year.
Yeah, with Marcus,
How did you find stepping away and having 2 years kind of off and being at home more? You got married, you had Kobe, a lot of other things happened. How was that period for you?
Yeah, it was 2019 to now seems like a different lifetime, honestly. Like, you probably say the same. But my dad passed away in 2020. And then Lana and I got married late 2020, and then we had Kobe the start of this year. So I feel like there's been a lot of growing up and maturing going on. You know what I mean? Like, moving on with life and setting up my coaching stuff, and like building my own business rather than like. I look at you and I'm like, he does it so well. Like, he's traveling like 2 to 3 weeks here, 2 to 3 weeks there, and he's running his business. And to Perth is like the most. You're doing some serious travel. So it's like, I look at you and I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I know within myself that after a 2 to 3 week trip, I'm buggered for like 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And the discipline to continue, contact with clients and updating, all that sort of stuff. It's a lot of work, and that's not something I can do. So I guess I'm not retired from paddling, but I was doing it before in 2019 too. I was just being very selective with the races that I wanted to do. Yeah. And like, I think I said to you in 2019, I was like, I think I was the only one that you didn't beat this year, but it was not because you weren't paddling well. It's because I was not going to the races that I knew you'd win at. Yeah. And I was very selective for downwind races, and that was my goal. And Molokai and King of the Cut were for a long time the races that I wanted to win. And I guess I think it might have been a different story if 2019, if you won in 2019, I think I'd probably be super hungry to do Molokai on a SAP again.
Yeah.
But because I've not ticked it off, but because I achieved the goal that I set for myself, I'm, I guess, a little bit more happy to sit back and let others get into it. And also like the SAP, the fact that downwind SAP has kind of been replaced by downwind foil sort of lends itself to the path that I'm sort of doing now. I'd love to travel for downwind foil races, but there's kind of not the level. It's just not. It doesn't seem worthy. It's for fun still, and it hasn't sorted itself out. Like it's not a fully fledged sport. It's a epic community of frothers, but I'm not at the financially and with the family. Like it's not worth my time to go over and froth out for a week in Guadeloupe or southern France or Hood River. So it's that'll change, I guarantee. I hope, because I'd love to see the SAP downwind foil stuff, or just downwind foil in general, take off, because I think it's pretty cool.
And what do you think about the progression, I guess, from focusing on being an athlete to moving into that more, okay, I guess you're kind of being an entrepreneur in a way when you're actually just being an athlete, because you're trailblazing a sport that has no pathway. And as you spoke about before, rugby, you kind of have your steps and you gradually work your way up. Whereas in something like stand-up, like I know for myself, you're just making it up. Like you're looking at a couple of the guys who've been doing it for slightly longer than you, but they're also making it up. Like some of the I guess, greats of the sport are younger than me, So it's a weird place to be in. But then you're trailblazing at that point, and then you're moving into coaching and that type of thing now. How are you using that professional Christy's just in the background waving at me.
Hey, Christy.
Yeah. And how do you find that moving into professionally, like coaching and focusing on that? Like I know obviously you've progressed through into courses, your Casey Club, you're doing Casey catch-ups, you've got apparel. And I find this stuff really interesting because, as I said to you before, and I think when we caught up in September, we kind of do similar things. We have our different issues, but we're kind of doing similar things, trying to keep our passion and trying to make sure that we're working around that. Because the old saying, it's you don't live to work, you work to live. So
exactly.
It's trying to find that balance. But I guess how are you finding that whole transition into not retirement, but into a different stage of your life?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's been like a process for sure. And I think COVID certainly fast forwarded that. We sort of, I guess there wasn't many other options. It was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to race, what am I doing? And that was a good point to kind of sort of knuckle down and put a few ideas that I had previously and finally sort of put time towards it rather than training and traveling. But I've loved it. I think foiling has been a big part of that. Like I wrote a bunch of courses for flat water stand up, like tech race stand up, ocean paddling, and then downwind paddling, all for stand up. And while there were people that signed up, there wasn't like this big influx of interest. And then I included downwind foiling because it was like, oh, I'm really interested in this. Maybe there's someone else who wants to be into it too. And it was just like the floodgates opened relatively to the stand-up stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, well, that's where the interest is. And for sure, like there's so many things like I could do better. And I know that. And it's like in the process, I am creating things better and working towards it. And that's cool. Because I'm learning as I do it, as, I guess entrepreneurs do. It's like, okay, well, that's a basic need. And we need to sort of build from that, but we can do that basic much better.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but the foil froth is real. And like people are demanding like how-tos every week on like, I want to know how to do this. I want to know how to do that. Whereas for the SUP, like I've got a Facebook page and I do a Tuesday coaching call and everyone in the club can sign up to that Zoom call and we can talk about whatever question, whatever they want to talk about. And I'll go through the list and I'll look at videos and we'll sort of understand what it is they're doing wrong, what it is they're doing right, but also unpack the basic principles that you need to know to move forward and progress.
Yeah.
And for stand up, I think there's literally been in the last 18 months, probably 3 posts. And for foil, there's like 10 every week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like to me, that's, and this isn't just in Australia. Like I've got clients in Hawaii, in the US, in Europe.
Yeah.
Like in Africa, like everywhere. And the foil frothers are just so enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And they want stuff. They want like, okay, we want a video for this. We want a video for that.
Yeah.
Whereas the sup guys, like I've got all the videos for them, but I don't hear boo. So it's like, for me, why would I put more time into the sup stuff when the foil guys are interactive and the sup?
Oh yeah, I guess it's kind of interesting. As I said, I spoke about the niche, like the sup stuff is insane for me at the moment. So I have.
And yeah, it's for sure. Like I specialized in downwind sup.
Yeah.
And downwind sup is no longer like, it's no longer a sport, but it's like, it's 5% of what it ever was. Whereas for you, like you're like not only sup, but like the ski and like your background is very different to mine. And it's like very similar, you and I, but it's different at the same time. So it's, it's cool.
Yeah, no, it's just cool to hear like how well obviously the foiling stuff is doing. And I think it's exciting as well when you're sort of working with people who are so pumped on what they're doing and you're helping them and you're seeing results and you're really getting that. It's quite fulfilling being a coach as well. And it's similar to like when you win a race or you succeed there, like when you see one of your athletes or one of your clients or whatever you call them progress and achieve, it's kind of like, oh, okay, it's a pretty similar feeling. It's obviously always better to do it yourself, but if they do well, you do well. And it's, I find it awesome.
Yeah, the downwind foil coaching stuff has been so fulfilling. Like not only like that to me is obviously my passion at the moment, but for multiple reasons. The reason I first wrote is like, I'm like the only one doing it here. And I'm like, I want someone else to be out there with me. And now there's in Sydney on the Northern Beaches that like for the last 5 years, I've been the only one doing it. And now there's like just this summer, there's been about probably 30 guys starting to do it. So you do a downwind run and you run into guys along the way. It's like, oh, hey mate. Then you sort of sit and sort of, help them out a little and then keep going. And it's, it's cool to sort of cultivate that froth.
Yeah, no, I have seen like there's definitely more guys over here in WA doing the downwind. Like I remember first time I went and did it and I was learning with Marcus, and long story short, he stayed with me and helped me, and I did like, it took me an hour and a half to do 12K. Like it was just a nightmare. And I was like, why are you staying with me? Like why are you helping me? He's like, because he goes, I just want someone else to do it with. Like, no one else can do it, and this is boring for me. So he was kind of obviously doing a similar thing over here and trying to help as many people as they could get into the sport. So it is great to see it. Well, not the sport, the
hobby,
whatever it's called at the moment.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Cool to see how it's progressing. So I guess like let's go through your record. I nearly forgot about it, but Guinness World Record, longest foil.
Yeah, so it was a bit of an obscure one. It was furthest distance in 12 hours. So
is this a new record? Had someone done it before?
It was like I just Googled on Guinness. I was like, hydrofoil, like what are the records? And so there was this one that was called furthest distance on hydrofoil, and I'm like, oh, that's like downwind, I think. And so I looked into it, and it's like it says hydrofoil paddleboard, but it's a stand-up paddleboard hydrofoil. And it's been about 18 months in the making, like literally, and I haven't actually submitted all the evidence yet because it's a full-on like checklist, like nightmare paperwork. But it's all been done, which is nice. But so the hardest part, I guess, to do it was organizing a boat and being able to refuel while I'm out there. Basically, and I did the 100 with Marcus in Mandurah area in 2020, early 2020, and then I did 120 late 2020 over here from Wollongong back to Sydney.
Okay.
And then basically from then on, I was like, okay, I want to try and make this 200 happen because I know the speeds are possible. It's just about organizing a boat so I can basically refuel. And then I was looking at getting mates to help out, and it was just hard. Like, it's just, just hard work logistically. Like, how Molokai is hard to organize all the logistics. This was like times 20. And I ended up sort of going down, talk to my sponsors and basically get money. And then obviously they want photos and they want videos. And it's like, oh, we're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah.
And actually the 120 I did, I got a mate on a jet ski to sort of come out for part of it. And I never saw him. Never saw him for like 80, he literally was running a little bit late and I was going to wait for him. Like, well, I'm out here all day, mate. I'm not going to wait sitting in the water for you.
Yeah.
You're on a jet ski, you should be able to catch up. And the surf and the swells got so big that he was like literally couldn't see me. We had walkie-talkies and he was just hanging on to his jet ski. He couldn't grab the walkie-talkie and he was lucky to make it in, I think. So shout out to Enrique.
Yeah, jet skis are not that good when it gets big, right? Like I had a couple of guys film me like when I was just falling, and yeah, it was like kind of like quite challenging for them to stay on the ski, whereas like on the foil it's like so easy.
Yeah, it's same with boats. Like even the last 2 weeks ago when we ended up having a big catamaran. It was actually a party boat.
Yeah.
Normally it's a party boat in Sydney, and this guy didn't have work between like Monday to Friday, basically. So he's like, oh, I'm free all of April during the week. And I'm like, all right, let's try and make this work. So we, got it all together, raised all the funds from sponsors. And yeah, we finally got it to happen.
Yeah.
And basically we launched we had a few options. Basically, if there was the hardest bit was finding 12 hours of wind. Like,
yeah.
Even in WA, like 12 hours of wind isn't that common. Like,
no.
It's like you get the sea breeze in the afternoon, but the mornings are usually pretty nice. In Sydney, we get days that it's windy, like when the southerly front comes through, or like we've had heaps of easterlies this summer, so it was horrible to sort of pick a day.
Yeah.
And the other thing to think about is swell direction. If the swell direction is the wrong way, it's going to make it a really hard day. And basically the coast around Sydney sort of runs sort of northeast, southwest. That's kind of a straight along the coast sort of run.
Yeah.
But you normally get like a northeasterly wind would be great, but it's super rare to get a northeasterly up at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And a southerly, you're more likely to get going, but it goes southeast eventually. Yeah. So you kind of got to get the front, like the start of the front, where it sort of goes west and then turns south and goes southeast by the afternoon. Yeah. Generally, sort of what we're looking for. And the other thing is if the swell's too big, it just wraps into shore. And so for the southerly run, that's an issue. For the northeast run, not so much. So northeast, you actually, like a northerly is going to push you offshore, and an east swell will actually push you on. So there were a couple of days where we're looking, this northeasterly could be really good.
Yeah.
But it never sort of materialized. The forecast sort of a few days out was looking, great, northeasterly, that'd be epic. And a little east swell, great. But there was no wind until like 10 or 11 in the morning on the actual days. So we sort of didn't ever pull the trigger on that. But then there was basically the second last week of our waiting period, and basically days are getting too short. So it was furthest distance in 12 hours at the moment, or 2 weeks ago in Sydney, the daylight hours were only like 11 hours and 30 minutes maybe. So, and obviously you want to probably start in the dark and finish maybe on dark. And so the plan was to start in the dark down at Bawley Point, so the south coast. And if the wind didn't come up, so be it. I'll just paddle because it's better than just sitting on the beach. Yeah. Because it's on a hydrofoil paddleboard we're going.
Yeah.
And at least gives me time. And then finish. The plan was Bondi. But we had, I wanted to go further than Bondi, and the boat captain in the end wanted me to finish shorter. We ended up coming in at La Perouse. But the conditions were far from ideal, I guess. They were good. Like we had wind the whole time. Yeah. But the morning was offshore, basically. It was a westerly. And the southerly was coming, but it hadn't quite filled in yet. So it was beautiful morning, like sunrise and glassy water, and there's a little bit of south swell, so I could get going. Yeah. But the first 2 hours was a lot of pumping.
Yeah. So how did you manage your body, and how did you train up to it, and how did you maintain your nutrition throughout the thing? Because it's a pretty big feat to be going for 12 hours.
Yeah. So in the end, it was only 11 hours, 15 minutes, but still, that's a long time. Yeah. Yeah. So training wise, basically it was just trying to get on foil downwind as much as I could. And if there wasn't any wind, I was literally just going out on a big foil and doing reps in the surf, like staying up on, like if I had a 50 minutes to go for like to train, I'd be up on foil for 50 minutes, just pumping around in circles and reading the ocean, I guess is, that was my main thing. Like, how can I, like, I'm not going to be able to pump for 12 hours no matter how hard I train. But when I get tired, I have to be able to tap into the energy of the ocean. Yeah. So that was really the main focus. I actually had big plans to do all this sort of stuff in the gym, and with Lana being pregnant and then birth of Kobe, it just didn't happen. Yeah. So I think there was a bit that I sort of left in the tank there as well. But I've always said, like, if you want to run a marathon, you should be running. Or if you want to swim 100 meters fast, you should be swimming, or whatever it is, whatever your goal is, the best activity for you to do to be good at that is whatever it is. So like, if you want to be a stand-up paddleboarder, stand-up paddle. Gym's good for supplementary stuff. It's going to sort of, work out those imbalances, but you should be doing majority of your sport that you're aiming to do. So I just foiled as much as I could, basically, which, like, I talk about it as training, and it's like, this is pretty fun training. I still love foiling, and the downwind stuff I absolutely froth on, and it was definitely not the best timing. Like Lana's, over summer, she was like heavily pregnant, like 7, 8, 9 months pregnant. And I'm like, oh, there's a southerly tomorrow. Reckon you can drop me off? And she was an absolute legend. Like, I don't think she said no once. Like, if there was a wind, she's like, okay, I'll drop you off. Okay, I'll pick you up. And being COVID, especially sort of in the middle of it, and her being pregnant, it was like, well, I don't want you to do shuttles with people, because if someone else has COVID, I want you to bring it home. So she was like, not that I blackmailed her, but she was kind of like, well, I'd prefer to give you a lift than you get COVID and bring it home.
Yeah.
So it was
a balancing act at that time. I know I was
full on. Yeah. So it was lots of hours in the car driving for Lana, and then even the first couple of weeks with Kobe, like, I'm like, man, I hope you like the car, because the next few weeks there's a bit of wind and I need to train and test these foils out. And he likes the car, which is good.
Yeah, that is positive.
Yeah.
But so why did you do it? Like, I was talking to Bonnie Hancock. She's actually paddling around Australia. I'm not sure if you've seen that. And
yeah, I have. I saw that. Yeah.
One of the first things I said to her, I was like, but why? Why are you doing this? So why did you want to paddle foil for 12 hours?
Yeah. So I think, look, my dad planted the seed, basically. We back in 20, as I said, I'm really bad at dates, but probably when foiling first started and was starting to do downwinders here in Sydney, Dad was like, oh, this is pretty cool. It'd be cool. Like, I reckon you could go down to the Roaring 40s and just ride the biggest waves in the world. And you'd probably go all the way around Antarctica on this one swell. Yeah. And I was like, that's pretty far-fetched, Dad. Do you reckon we could start with something smaller? He's like, smaller. So what about the Great Australian Bight? And I'm like, why don't we start with Bass Strait? So in 2020, I started looking into foiling, like going across Bass Strait on the foil. And that was like, Dad planted that seed.
How many kilometers, Bass Strait?
That's 210, 220-ish. Yeah. So I've started trying to look for boats and that sort of stuff. And like, this was the summer of 2019, 20. And basically COVID happened. And so it was like, well, what's the backup plan? What do I do instead of Bass Strait? And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll just do 200 Ks either side of Sydney. It should be easier to organise. And it turned out it probably wasn't that much easier, but it's now done. But it's sort of, I don't know, kind of like, I chatted to Casper after he did Kattegat, or he's done a bunch now. He's paddling around Denmark now, but just the adventure stuff. And that's, I also paddled up, like when I was training for this, for the foiling stuff, I actually paddled 100 Ks, so 50 Ks up the Hawkesbury and 50 Ks back, just on my stand-up, so not even on a foil, just on a stand-up, just so I would know that I could, that was a 14.5-hour paddle, just so I knew that I could go the distance and the time, I guess. And so it was just like, I guess with COVID, no races happening, it's like, well, what's a challenge that I can set myself? But also, like, Dad planted a seed, not like, I did it like with Dad out there, basically. So like, we scattered Dad's ashes out in the ocean, and there's a bunch of moments out there on, the other day, and dolphins and massive big birds, and yeah, it was just beautiful out there. And for it to all happen finally with my son here, it was pretty special.
Yeah, I can imagine how special it was. And I think just all the planning, and I think you talk about your dad a lot, and you obviously unfortunately lost him recently, and I guess you had all these plans, and to start to fulfill them even when he's gone, it's sort of it brings you a connection to him, and I think that's really special. You can sort of hear it as you talk about it. So yeah, I guess like I personally haven't really looked at any of these challenges. I even speaking to Lincoln the other day, and he's doing like Yukon 1000. I was like, okay, do we just start doing all these long things now? Like,
I could like I wanted to do the Yukon one year for sure. Like when I did that Hawkesbury River paddle, we did it. Me and a friend, actually a client of mine, Justin. Yeah. We were both training to do the Hawkesbury Classic, and then it was cancelled. I'm like, oh man, like he's been trying to do Molokai since end of 2019, so he was training for 2020, and it's been cancelled again and again and again. He's like, James, he's like, let's do this Hawkesbury thing because I'm sick of races being cancelled. Let's just go do it. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. We'll paddle 50Ks up, 50Ks back.
Yeah.
And we started from Palm Beach, and it was like we carried all our food and water, and it was like a really cool adventure, I guess. And yeah, it was same sort of thing. I just wanted to do something, tell a bit of a story. And I don't know, it was fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah. And so did you film it, promote it, like put a doco together? Is that the plan, or is it?
So for the I guess I'm the world record for the 200, where we had film crew on, and we had a bit of footage, and mate of mine's going to put a bit of a doco together, and we're probably going to screen it at one of the local cinemas here in Collaroy, and do a bit of a sort of a fundraiser for brain cancer. So yeah.
And so I guess going forward, you've got you're working with Sonova, you've obviously got your own business, you're working with Axis. How is that all playing out for you at the moment? Really good. You enjoy working with everybody, and you're sort of, what's your next developments that you're sort of really working on?
Yeah, so also with the wing brands, I've started to work a bit with the value guys as well. So yeah, which has been cool. Just another like new sport basically, and like I'm not necessarily doing the slalom and freestyle stuff, but I can help them with the wave riding stuff and the downwind stuff. So it's between that and Sonova and Marcus with the boards, and then Axis and Adrian with the foil designs. There's been plenty on the plate, and lots of testing to do, which is that's good fun. It's out there on the water and practicing the stuff, and then obviously with the coaching, got a bunch of foil camps coming up on the East Coast.
Yeah, and
it's all good fun. I'm loving it.
Sounds like you're enjoying it. You got Maldives next year as well, so back over there I saw, which will be cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
That one. So lots of fun stuff coming up, and I guess going forward. So how do you see yourself 5-10 years from now? Are you still doing this type of stuff? Is there a new sport? Are you still basing yourselves around the ocean? Like, what's the general plan for you?
Yeah, I think continue. Like, I'd love to continue like coaching people and sort of holding people's hand through the downwind foil and surf foil and wing foil process. I think for me that's really fulfilling, and seeing people go from zero experience and just the want to do it to doing it themselves and being like fully self-sufficient is, as you know, it's pretty rewarding. It's a nice way to, I guess, spend your time and I guess make a living. Continuing to develop boards and foils and wings with Sonova, Axis, and Value. I'm loving chatting to like I was saying in the car after Downwinders, like it's chatting to Marcus and Notich, and in the car it was like that's super exciting to me, and to be able to do that with companies that are just as excited about it, it is. That's a pretty cool way to be, working on something and towards something. So that's super exciting, and I'm loving that experience, and being able to give that feedback to brands and get a product that is exactly what we'd hoped it to be, or maybe it's not. We've got to work more on it. It's like it's the challenge. Like you saw us working on the Unlimiteds with Sonova and Marcus, and it's the journey. You get to the end, it's like, oh yes, this thing's great, and I think with foiling and winging and foil boards, like all that sort of stuff, there's where it's cool to be at the beginning of something. Whereas for stand up, I felt like we both sort of came in sort of after it had, after that initial plateau. I think, in Australia, it definitely seems to have plateaued, but in Europe and the US seems like it's surging again, and Asia's surging. So I'm not ruling out racing anymore either. I'd love to continue to race, but at the moment, foiling in Australia is bigger.
As well. Don't forget that. Well, you won a few tech races. Did you win the distance race as well? I think you did over in Perth that year. So
yeah.
I'm sure you've still got a few races in you.
Definitely. And I guess for me, I've never been that passionate about the long, flat races.
Yeah.
And like the technical stuff. So like I think coming from the surfing background kind of explains it. That the tech race in and out through the surf, I love. The downwind, I love. The flat water stuff is a really good challenge. And I really do think if I put the time in and trained really hard, I'd probably do okay at it. But I've just never done it. I've never put the time in to train like I see you do and be so successful. It's like, I reckon I could match it with Boothie if I put the time in. But I get distracted. If the waves are good, I'm like, flat water on the lake, surf in the ocean, barrels. It's like, I'm going for the barrels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, it's just like, you've got the discipline, and that's your kind of like, that's your bread and butter, that's your job. So you got to go out there and
for sure, and absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's where I've just focused on. So I guess you find, as I spoke about before, like you find your niche, and my niche is racing. So I had to that's just what I had to do. Like same thing similar. Like I was like, if I focus more on sprints, or if I even like did a surfing contest, like maybe I could do it. Like if I focus the amount of time I spend on racing into those facets, maybe I could do better.
But it's like, but you're gonna.
Why?
Yeah, it's like if you stick to the stuff you know, and you're going to continue to do well. And as you said, it's your bread and butter, and that's for sure. That's what it is for me. Like the foiling and the sup surfing and the tech racing, and then the flat water stuff. Like I do love it when I'm out there in the moment, but doing the training, it's I'm not rushing out the door to paddle on flat water, and that's just my makeup and how I was brought up, really. Yeah,
absolutely. And so going, I guess now that this sort of stage of the podcast, is there anything else you want to talk about, or can you let the audience know where they can find out more about you?
Yeah, so I guess if you want to check out my website, go to www.caseyAus.com. That's where you can find, I guess, all the coaching stuff online, the Coach Casey Club, and see any foil camps, or there will be SUP camps as well. But at the moment, the foil camps are probably taking priority because there's people literally emailing and calling me to run them. Yeah. And then sponsors wise, obviously Sonova and Axis, Bayou, Catfish Designs, the Outdoor Supply Co, Karahi Leashes, sure, Maui Gym, Blue Dinosaur Bars. There's a bunch that have my back, so I appreciate all their support, and make sure if you see those brands to support them, because they're helping us do what we're doing.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. And just to everybody out there, if you want to listen to this, just check out Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you want to watch this and see our lovely faces, check out YouTube. And as always, this is brought to you by Booth Training. So, James, thanks so much for joining me, and looking forward to seeing how the rest of your year progresses.
Yeah. Cheers, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.